Welcome to Toddler Time! Today we're going to learn about Paul Bunyan and his friend Babe the Blue Ox. This is the story of Paul Bunyan presented by Little Classics. A long time ago, there was a baby so big that it took not one, but 5 storks to deliver him to his parents. The arrival of the big baby caused quite a stir in the small coastal Maine town, for no one had ever seen a baby of such an epic size before. The baby's proud parents named him Paul Bunyan. Now it is true that babies grow quickly, but Paul grew faster than any baby. He was always hungry and ate a huge amount of food. After just 1 week, Paul was so large that he was already wearing his father's clothes.
One night, when the ocean was peaceful and everyone in the town was nestled snugly in their beds, Paul drifted off to sleep too. Unfortunately, Paul moved around quite a bit in his sleep. In fact, he rolled around in his sleep so many times that night he caused an earthquake. The people of the town moaned and groaned. It seemed like Paul was always disturbing the peace somehow, even when he did regular things that everyone did. And it was all on account of his huge size. "This just won't do," cried the townspeople. "Paul has to go."
Paul had grown to be so big that his parents didn't know what to do with him. And so, Paul's parents gathered up their things and took Paul deep into the woods. And that is where Paul grew up. From a young age, Paul could do many things that boys his age didn't or couldn't do very well. One of the things was wielding an axe. Because of his unusually large size, cutting down trees was easy for Paul. With one swift chop, he could take out several trees at once. By the time Paul was about 20, he had the strength of 50 men. He grew restless and decided that it was time to move west and seek new adventure. He said goodbye to his parents, and with his axe over his shoulder, he set off on his own.
As Paul continued west, he encountered the most terrible snowstorm anyone had witnessed in ages. A dreadful chill kept across the land, and Paul found it harder and harder to carry on. Paul trudged along through the swirling snow, so thick he could hardly see. He found shelter in a spot of the woods where the trees were thick and built a fire. As he warmed himself by the fire, he heard a strange cry. "Ma! Ma!"
What could that be? Wondered Paul. He followed the sound, making his way through snowdrifts, until at last he came upon a large frozen animal in the snow. It was certainly no ordinary animal. It was giant baby blue ox. Paul bent down and picked up the ox. He carried him back to the fire to warm up. Paul and the blue ox became best friends. Paul named him Babe. The two were inseparable. Babe continued to grow, and before long, the horns on his head reached the top of the tallest trees.
One day, Paul cut down trees with his trusty axe for the people in a nearby town. They needed the lumber to build all sorts of things, like new houses, buildings, and barns for the growing population. Babe helped him with the work by rolling over the logs to the river so they could float down the sawmill. This gave Paul an idea. He and Babe could be traveling lumberjacks. That way they could see the country and help out people along the way. And they were already a great team. When they arrived at their first logging camp, the lumberjacks were certainly surprised. They had never seen such a giant man and ox before.
At first, people were afraid because Paul and Babe were so large. But as they moved from the forest to forest and from town to town, the gentle giants became the most famous lumberjack team in the land. Everywhere they went, they performed good deeds and helped people along the way. One time, Paul caught hundreds of fish with his bare hands and delivered them all to the cook at the local lumber camp. Everyone was so pleased. The fish fed the lumberjacks for weeks.
Another time, with one stomp on the ground with his giant hoof, Babe made a public pool for a town to enjoy during the hot summer days. Paul and Babe's good deeds were endless. As they neared the end of their traveling days, Babe grew tired and thirsty, so Paul dug out the Great Lakes to provide him with some drinking water. Then Paul turned to Babe and said, "It's time to settle down, Babe. Where shall we make our home? That's when they settled on the edge of the Big Onion River in Minnesota and started their own logging company.
Paul spread the word that they were looking for lumberjacks to work at the logging camp. Thousands of men traveled from far and wide for the chance to work with Paul and Babe. Paul hired hundreds of lumberjacks, but the men he liked to work with the best were the biggest and strongest of the bunch. They came to be known as the 7 Axemen, and each was named Elmer so that when Paul called their name, they would all come running at once.
Now the lumber company is gone, but what about Paul and Babe? Their legend lives on. If you listen very carefully the next time you're in the woods, you just may hear Paul's far-off call, "Timber!" The animal friends we'd like to introduce you today are Helga and Lilbit. They are Russian tortoises. I have Lilbit right here.
And this is Helga. They are tortoises, so they do look like a turtle in that they have a shell, and a lot of their characteristics do look the same, but tortoises are land animals. They live on land, they burrow on land, they eat on land. Whereas turtles are more aquatic animals. They live in the water, they live near water, and they eat a lot of stuff in the water as well.
So these tortoises can live up to more than 40 years. They really like to eat their leafy greens. They love to eat healthy. And these guys are about full grown. They get about 6 inches long.
So these guys are actually, they live up in our gift shop at the Imaginarium. So whenever you stop by, make sure you come and say hi. We have these tortoises, we have our big tortoise named Sherbert, and we also have a little turtle as well named Filbert. So there's lots of fun friends for you to see.
Our items needed to make the lumberjack beards will include paper or a paper plate, it depends on what you have, colors, scissors, a hole puncher, and then string, ribbon, yarn, elastic, or whatever you can find in the house. And finally, for our craft today, we will be making lumberjack beards just like Paul Bunyan has, and they'll look a little something like this.
So we'll walk you through how to make your own beard. I made mine out of construction paper, and Gabby made hers from a paper plate, which could work. We used a variety of different colors. We went off like the basic colors. There's a black, a blonde, there's even like a red-haired one. Gabby's is nice and brown. We will start, I'm gonna make a red colored one. So all you have to do is take the construction paper and cut it into a nice long beard shape. Next, you're gonna draw all the different little hairs that grow on a beard. Once you're done coloring, you can take a hole puncher and punch a hole on each side of the beard. If you don't have a hole puncher, just ask your parents to help you. Next, you're going to take a piece of thread, string, whatever you have, and just snake it through those holes and tie a little knot to secure it. Once those are tied, you're all done.
Or if you want, you can cut a hole in the mouth so that you have a little mouthpiece to talk through and add some yarn to spruce it up a little bit. Thanks for joining us for this week's Toddler Time. We're the Gabbies. We hope you had fun.
See you later, little lumberjacks.